goes. You know, we're all just figuring it out as it goes, and conversations help us along the way. I recently learned the Sanskrit word satsang, which means gathering for the truth. It conveys exactly what these conversations are and mean to me. I hope that is perhaps something that you resonate with, whether it's these conversations or conversations we have with our friends and teachers and people in our lives on these subjects. This idea of gathering for the truth, conveying the truth, talking about, what really matters, what's really going on here is really powerful and empowering and connective. Thought I'd share that in respect and reverence for the Sanskrit language. I want to just say that I haven't quite known how to follow up our last conversation. Peace begins within. Talking about the crisis in Ukraine right now. Any topic feels frivolous in comparison. It almost felt like moving on. When moving on feels like leaving behind that important conversation and that important focus. Forgetting that there are people suffering, struggling right now at this very moment for their lives and freedom in Ukraine. So, what do we do when we feel like this? Well, for one thing, we keep the conversation open. Another episode on being peace. And keep listening to those who are suffering, holding space for their truth, practicing being peace in our lives, and breathing in their suffering and breathing out to them relief. Both things can exist at once. It's not a question of either or. That was and continues to be an important conversation to have, continue, and practice, while at the same time, the work we're doing, the fuel we're giving to living consciously is important and valid, because that's how we create a new earth. It's through each one of us. That's how we create peace in the world, more justice, more harmony. So, with that, today's conversation is about acceptance, specifically accepting that I am a human in process. Maybe you want to just close your eyes for a minute, sink into this moment, and say that to yourself, either out loud or in your head. I am a human in process. And just sit with it. What does it feel like? What sensations are present in your body? What comes up for you as you contemplate this truth of your humanness and the fact that you, like all of us, are in process, a continual process, a never-ending process. Maybe that's really overwhelming. Maybe you feel a sigh of relief. Whatever it is, just acknowledge that. And take a deep breath in and let it go. After my yoga class today, I was talking with someone about their plans for their next tattoos, for completing their sleeve. And upon my travels home, I realized that this is the perfect image, visual metaphor for being in process. Whether you like tattoos or not, just come with me in this metaphorical journey. Her tattoo sleeve is in process. I think she had maybe, 2, 3 or so. So imagine, right? The majority of her arm is bare and she has these current tattoos. And as she goes, she will add each new tattoo, ultimately creating the sleeve. We could focus on the sleeve as the goal, the completion, the destination, and in doing so, feel a sense of incomplete until the sleeve is done. Or we could focus on the exciting journey of each new tattoo revealing itself to us as we go. And the fun and excitement of the journey, of the process, of being in process. It's the same thing with our lives. We can focus on achieving goals, reaching a specific destination, feeling incomplete until we do. I'm not saying that we shouldn't make goals for ourselves. It's important to highlight the truth that setting external expectations for ourselves can easily lead to feelings of incomplete, inadequacy, chasing. Or we can relax into the joy of living each day, each moment, and the truth of each moment wherever we are in process. The days we feel and embody our innate completeness, going with the flow of life unfolding each moment, as well as the days we feel like a complete and utter mess and unsure where we're headed, unsure of our value. Because ultimately, it's all our teacher. It's all our fuel to evolve and continue our development as a human being, which is never done. That's the joy of being in process. And so we relax into it and we truly enjoy the journey of that unfolding, open to it all. But more on that to come. Whatever it is, we are always in process. We are humans in process. And that's the beauty. If it weren't that way, if it wasn't this way, life would be so incredibly boring. And I believe it's Alan Watts has a great metaphor for this, where he basically says, if your life was a dream and you could control the dream, night after night, you would do what you want, you would make your life how you want, whatever. But eventually you'd get bored of it. So you'd start adding challenges, you'd start doing this and that. And eventually your dream would become the life that you are actually living today. And I love that because, again, it's all about perspective, right? That's what we talk about so much with Reself. It's about the perspective. So with that perspective, we can understand that and hold ourselves to through the messiness. This is the process. And even if we're a mess on the floor, crying, snot and tears flying everywhere, that's part of the process. It's how we learn. It's how we open ourselves up. It's how we become more compassionate. It's how we evolve as a human being. And that's ultimately what this journey, this process is about. It's the evolution of ourselves through our experiences, fueled by our experiences and their lessons and the integration into higher states of consciousness, of being in love, in compassion, of wisdom and truth, and living our authenticity, giving our gifts away to the world, contributing in that way through our personal evolution and interaction with each other, and enjoying the present moment. Process is never complete. That's what's exciting. The process is never complete, but we as humans already are. What that means is that we have everything we need within us. And it's about understanding that innately we are enough. Innately, what is within us is enough. We have this natural intelligence to become what we are meant to become in the world, coded within us. While we simultaneously go through this journey of learning and discovering and evolving and experiencing and understanding and seeing clearly. But again, more on that to come. This conversation is a reminder of and invitation back to what you know innately within your being. So much of our experiences can disconnect us from this truth, from this innate knowing, from our completeness. But like everything in Reself, we call this step relearn, because the truth is we know. It's just a matter of remembering, revealing, relearning. We come into this world and get imprinted upon us. We get programmed, beliefs, systems of oppression, ways of being, and we unconsciously adapt to them to survive. This is unconsciously wired within us evolutionarily to adapt to survive as a human being. And as a part of Reself, we find that through understanding these sciences, psychology, neuroscience, biology, the environment, they provide us a lens of objective understanding of things that happen below our conscious awareness, things that we do so we can become aware of them and empower ourselves for our well-being through that knowledge, through those disciplines. The trouble is that we can get so lost in this imprinting, so convinced that this imprinting is who we truly are. Some of us get more convinced of the validity of this way of being in the world that's been imprinted upon us and modeled to us than others. Regardless, no matter how painful, we cling to it because it's known, familiar, and thus seemingly more comfortable than the discomfort of the unknown. Again, evolutionarily wired to avoid discomfort, to avoid perceived threats. So we cling to the perceived stability of this way of being. We cling to our egos, our identities of who we think we are. But our experiences welcome us to let go and open up and begin to flow and experience a new way of being, our true way of being, grounded in the truth of our non-separation, of our interconnectedness and authenticity to contribute what it is we are here to contribute. Because and I love this idea that each of us has a blueprint of our purpose here on earth, right? We can look at children and see, if we're really paying attention, that they're constantly showing us their gifts. And if we pay enough attention to and develop systems that allow children to not only explore, but embrace their unique gifts and talents, then we allow those blueprints to develop rather than imprinting on these little humans how they should be in the world. Which, in case we need the reminder, clearly isn't working because we have an environmental catastrophe on our hands. We have a human catastrophe on our hands of harming each other, marginalizing each other, oppressing each other, feeling disconnected and isolated from each other. Clearly something's just not working here. We as a collective are awakening to this agreement. And like everything, it starts with us at the individual level of awakening to this, awakening to how it shows up in our lives, and awakening to not only how it shows up in the collective, but how this imprinting, programming, and modeling has been internalized. And so doing the work to also deconstruct that internalized way of being so that we can be authentic and connected and compassionate and understanding and collaborative and empowered and well, because there's room for all of us to be all of those things together here on a flourishing earth, with each of us flourishing in our unlimited potential. But there is work to be done in order to get to that place. When we let people be what they are here, what is authentic to them to be and contribute, that makes the world a better place. And we get these pings and breadcrumbs, whether we're fully authentic or fully, imprinted and bought into the imprint. We constantly get pings and breadcrumbs that reveal to us this path and purpose. And sometimes we're brave enough to follow it. And often that following might be in contradiction to or away from what has been imprinted upon us. So there is a process of unlearning involved, or relearning and returning. That's what our upcoming soul workshop, Coming Home, facilitates. If you're interested, you can use the link in the description to sign up to get notified about its upcoming release, when it's released, and receive exclusive discounts. No one has all the answers. Should it be obvious, but in case it's not, I don't have all the answers either. I know nothing, right? There is space for both truths, and both truths exist, right? I know nothing. And at the same time, I know that everything I need is already within me. Just as that truth applies to every other human. But we'll get into that. As the host of these conversations, this podcast, and as the founder of Reself, I share with you humbly what I learned through my experiences and through my study and integration of a diverse array of philosophies, sciences, and practices that, at the end of the day, return me to my inner wisdom as they return us all to our own inner wisdom, truth, and authenticity. So while it is me talking, writing, facilitating, sharing, it is not just me. I am one of thousands of different people, philosophies, disciplines of knowledge, practices, timeless wisdom, getting wrapped up, intersecting with each other, and being delivered through one mode to you so you can hear what you need to hear along your path wherever you are in your process. It's just the medium, right? There's no difference between me and you and my ability to integrate this and your ability. We are all teachers and we are all students. Everything is ultimately a modality that leads us back to this authenticity, to living consciously. Certain paths, certain modalities resonate with different people. But again, ultimately, it returns us back to our truth, our inner wisdom, our ability, and I believe natural way of existence, which is to live consciously. Why? Because that's our truth. So much of our experience, again, leads us away from this. So, as individuals, we get to bring ourselves home. We get to facilitate that return through the tools and wisdom and practices that are passed down, that are shared, that are learned through our own experiences. Like I said, we are born complete. We are already complete. There is nothing wrong with any of us. We are innately and inherently enough and worthy. If you don't believe it, or feel it, or some days you doubt it, as I and the rest of humanity are right there with you doing, it's not a reflection of you, or of me, or of our worthiness or completeness, but of the systems that we grew up in that taught us we aren't enough as we are. Part of being an early human, a young human, and being in that survival mode, part of survival, on top of our basic needs getting met, is the need for love, unconditional love, being seen and being heard. So anything that we're receiving a message on that through displaying our authenticity is in contrast with our ability to survive in those other needs of love, being seen, being heard, it's going to change how we show up. We are going to adapt to show up regardless of what's authentic to us, but in order to be loved, seen, and heard. So not only does that in our development create this idea that my authenticity is not enough to get me love seen and heard, but also the feeling of not enough comes from our experiences with systems of oppression. Whether it's ageism, racism, sexism, or any other forms of oppression, we internalized these systems as we grew up. The greatest truth, and I think a really liberating truth, is that systems only maintain themselves via the participation of individuals. So when we unindoctrinate ourselves, when we remove these internalized systems of oppression from our being, they can't live in us anymore. We don't feed them through our actions. And that is ultimately, again, what contributes to our individual well-being and collective well-being. Here's an example of an internalized system of oppression. If we're looking at ableism as a system of oppression, meaning able-bodied people, and the ways in which our systems, laws, buildings, favor able-bodied people and thus oppress people with disabilities, and we look specifically through the lens of mental health, though mental health is rapidly becoming a normalized topic and need, we can look at, do I have this internalized fear of being called crazy or of being crazy? When we unpack what that is, we see that craziness, mental instability, mental unwellness, all of those things that word stands for is an internalized idea that being mentally unwell is not okay, is not rewarded, is not acceptable. So then I police my quote unquote crazy so other people might not perceive the craziness I think I'm seeing. Whereas someone else outside of me might police my behaviors and judge my behaviors and whatever, and that's their own business, right? It has nothing to do with me. It is a reflection of them. But I have, because of the social messaging and the socialization and the systems, teach me that that is not okay. It is not rewarded in society. And so I do unconsciously what I can to shrink any form, police any form that might express in myself, which is just unfair to ourselves and unfair to each other. Most obviously unfair to those people who it is directly oppressing through people with disabilities. Because when we give ourselves permission to show up fully, we're giving each other permission to show up fully. When I give myself permission to see, as Pema Chodron says, and start where you are, see my neurosis as neurosis and just let it be that, and understand that we all have our own neurosis, it's okay. But if we internalize this system and then begin to police our behaviors, let alone police each other's behaviors, because we don't even want to look at our own behaviors, around it, or change and alter the ways that we behave, which, as we said before, starts way younger than we're even conscious of, because we're just adapting to the society in which we're born into. For love, to be seen, to be heard, to survive. But once we become conscious of it, it doesn't have to persist. That's why it's important to bring to light these systems, and it's important to understand that they can't maintain themselves if we don't feed them. And not feeding them starts with learning how they show up in our own lives and learning how to no longer contribute to them in the lives of others. A phenomenal book on this subject that was absolutely life-changing for me, and I wish it would have been put in one of my college classes, is The Body is Not an Apology by Sonia Renee Taylor, linked in the description. If you read but one book this year, let that be your book. It will change your life. On that note, I want to share a playful idea from Alice in Wonderland, which is the conversations that she has in this theme of madness. And it's obviously, just in case there's any misunderstanding, it's not to glamorize mental illness. What we're talking about here is this sense of allowing ourselves to be free, and this idea of freedom as being crazy and deemed unacceptable socially. So she says to the cat, "But I don't want to go among mad people." And the cat says, "Oh, you can't help that. We're all mad here. I'm mad, you're mad." And she asks, "How do you know I'm mad?" And the cat says, "You must be, or you wouldn't have come here." And she asks, "So I've gone mad?" And she's told, "I'm afraid so. You're entirely bonkers. And I'll tell you a secret, all the best people are." So through the story, Alice goes on this journey of accepting the quote-unquote craziness inherent in us all, and instead of policing it, she embraces it. She sees that these characters she meets are in fact free or aligned, or who she does want to actually go amongst. And in reflecting on this and reflecting on my own experience with this specific example, and I think that a lot of us can relate to this in one way or another, there came a point when I had to stop being afraid of my own truth and be willing to see that clearly. Being willing to be seen as crazy or mad, because just like in Alice in Wonderland, we're not following how we are taught to be and behave and conform. And that coincided with stopping using substances to escape or to numb, or however one might use any mind-altering substance, be it alcohol, caffeine, drugs, whatever, weed, and lean into the truth and the infinite support of wisdom and the support of living the truth of our journeys. And I think until I took that seriously, I couldn't see clearly. There are bits and pieces where clarity came, but it was really through allowing myself to sit with myself just as I am, with nothing else in the way, with nothing else in my system in that sense. It was acceptable for me in this sense to quote unquote know when I was smoking weed because I was high, so I could excuse my quote unquote crazy, right? It wasn't serious, right? There was an element of distance between. But once the substance was removed and it was me and the truth face to face, there was a choice about embracing or trying to stuff that down. And obviously, I chose embracing. So I think that there's a really important subcontext here, which is the element that sobriety, detoxing, removing the use of substances in a non-intentional way, forming a new relationship with plant medicine that is intentional, in deep reverence and respect for, and understanding the seriousness of entering into that interaction with these medicines and redefining how I viewed these things that, again, allowed for numbing or distanced playfulness because, especially in something like alcohol, your whole consciousness is not there. And questioning why certain substances are introduced to us, are normalized, and embracing those questions, going on my own journey with those questions, again, forming my own relationship with these things and creating an intentionality around it. If you're curious on that subject, I think that Michael Pollan has a really great conversation on Joe Rogan about creating intentionality with these specifically plant medicines, re-understanding our relationship with substances, the history of plant medicine in our lives, which, again, I consider weed to be amongst that as well. Tobacco, the same thing. He talks about tobacco, looking at the ways in which it's used in our lives now as this numbing effect, but in indigenous cultures and cultures all around the world throughout history, it's actually been used as a healing modality when it's used intentionally in ritual with a specific mindset and a specific environment. You can also read his book, This Is Your Mind on Plants, which the link will be in the description. And lastly, in this context of substances, understanding that for me, as I'm sure it is for a lot of people listening, we enter into these relationships. We form habits and patterns around these substances depending on our cultures and depending on, again, when we entered into a relationship with these. So for me, drinking alcohol in high school, smoking weed, having sex, what was the relationship and the understanding I had when I began those relationships with those activities versus where am I now in my life? What do these things now mean to me? And how does putting a pause on each of these relationships, each of these actions, to consider what I've learned, what is no longer working for me, and what is true for me, and then integrating it back into those things to bring intentionality, to bring authenticity, to bring integrity into those relationships, to form meaning, so that each interaction with something like this that has the potential to be addictive, which we'll add using our cell phones and using social media to this list as well, looking at when did I enter into these relationships? What was my mindset? What was the setting I was in? What were people around me doing them? How did people around me think about them? What was I modeled? And now, what doesn't work for me? How is it causing me to suffer? What is authentic to me? And how do I now rewrite my relationship and change my interaction with these things? For some of us, it might be seeing that no longer drinking alcohol is true for us. That is what works for us. Because through reflection, we saw that maybe we no longer know how to socialize in a specific context without it. Maybe we discover that after work, we come home and we crack a brewski, and that's become a habit, and it's actually contributing to low energy, to this cycle of stress. We might discover that having a different relationship with, for example, weed, and understanding something like weed or mushrooms or any other form of plant medicine, even tobacco, right, as something that can potentially be healing, and understanding its historical roots as a healing modality, and taking that time to pause that relationship while we explore ourselves and explore these things to form new relationships with them that are safe and serve our well-being, not detract from it. But that's all to say that, and using my own experience, there is a point that came in my life where I had to acknowledge what I was doing and what this undercurrent was. And in retrospect, it is on this subject of questioning one's sanity, one's validity, one's right to know truth and to question how things are and to embrace one's true self and embody their authenticity. Even if, and especially when, for example, in my case, it doesn't align with the ways we grew up and were raised and the people around us and what they're doing and what they believe. It doesn't mean you're wrong, you're crazy. It means you're beautiful in your difference, and that is to be celebrated and embraced fully, not numbed and avoided and stuffed down. And all of us have a right to embody our authenticity and a duty to the world to share the gift of our authenticity, to contribute to the beauty of diversity. And to circle back to Alice in Wonderland, if we're talking about this, then we reach this point that all the best people are authentic, are in embracing their truth, are owning their quote unquote craziness that might be perceived as craziness, but is in actuality freedom. We begin to see that the self-doubt, the feeling of not being enough is the result of internalizing these systems, of the imprinting and the programming. We can begin to sink into the truth that everything we need is already within us. It's only a matter of remembering, unlearning, and relearning, listening to our inner wisdom, and acting in alignment with it. And part of being in process is honoring this journey of unlearning and learning. We've each had difficult learning experiences, learned different things, and by sharing with each other, we also get to learn from each other. We get to study and read what other people have learned, and we get to integrate that. So we're never alone on this journey. I was recently at an event where someone was talking about meditation, and they were talking about it in the sense of being alone together when we meditate in group. And I think that it extends to so much more, right? What we were just talking about, right? This process of unlearning and learning and sharing our wisdom and being a human in process. It's both an individual internal process in that we are within ourselves. We are alone with our thoughts and our beliefs in the unlearning and learning. We are also together. We come together and we share. We hold space for each other, whatever that sharing looks like, whether it's wisdom or wounds. And we learn from it all together. And our process is strengthened in that togetherness. And that togetherness, like we started the beginning of this conversation, is the satsang. It's the coming together for the truth. And the truth being seeing everything clearly for what it is, being grounded in the truth of existence and experience and being, Knowing both everything I need is already within me, and at the same time, I know nothing. So I am so open and curious to what is the truth of this existence, what is out there, what is interconnecting us all, what is it, and how do I enjoy it? Which leads us to ultimately, life experience is our true teacher. Not only that, but it tests us to see what more there is to learn. We are constantly being met with our match. We are constantly being shown our blind spots. I wonder if, like me, you can think back to any experience recently where perhaps you could look at an experience through this lens of being tested to see if I could show up in a new way, in a more compassionate way, in a more understanding way, a more conscious, aware, authentic way, a less reactive way, right? Or maybe you can have compassion for yourself for not showing up, for showing up messy and reactive. That's okay too, because whatever it is, you learned. You can learn in the moment, you can learn after the moment. Learning is non-linear, it's not constricted by time. That's where we're going to leave this half of the conversation. Join us next week to wrap it up. Thank you for listening, for holding space for this conversation, for nourishing yourself with this conversation. If you enjoyed and you want to support the podcast, the link is in the description to do so. Greatly appreciated. Next week, we're going to dive into a large example of allowing our experiences, even those difficult ones, to be our teacher, about having those opportunities every day and how to take them and ground in the truth of our experience of being human and use them to contribute to our growth and embodiment of our authenticity. How to take it easy on ourselves, being in process, embrace being in process, and have fun with it. Make sure you're subscribed. Join our email list to get notified when the episode comes out. The link is in the description. Tell a friend, share with a friend. Sharing this energy is truly caring. And I'll see you next week. Have an incredible week. Bye, everybody.